Welcome to Leaving Nothing to Chance, your go-to podcast where we bring you insights from some of the most influential voices in small business and personal development. Each week, we dive deep into conversations with top thought leaders, authors, and business moguls from around the world, sharing their secrets to success and strategies for growth. Tune in for exclusive content that will inspire, motivate, and equip you to take your journey to the next level. This is Leaving Nothing to Chance.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to the show. And my guest today is Lisa Franz. And Lisa is a nutrition coach, a health coach, a digital nomad, a podcaster, got a background with a master's in exercise science as well as nutrition. And so you're really somebody who's really an expert in health. And welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be on. And before we hit record, we already noticed we have a lot of things to talk about. So I'm excited to get into it.
Lisa, we do. And let's start with a statement, okay? I love your response to this. Exercise is king, nutrition is queen. Put them together, you have a kingdom. Jack LaLanne said that 60 years ago. How do people do those two things in this crazy, modern, super technological, super easy in many cases world that we live in today?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. And again, also before we hit record, we were talking about the blue zones and what these zones within the Earth all had in common. So for those of you listening that are not familiar with the blue zones, it's just zones within the world that have been identified where people have lived the longest, so over 100 years on average. And they looked at what do they have in common, even though they're some of them close to the ocean, some of them up in the mountains and so on. And a big thing was, as we talked about, that they were just active in their day-to-day lives and that they based most of their nutrition around whole foods, so minimally processed or non-processed foods. And I think, yes, that is a great guideline, but to your point, unfortunately, in many of our environments, we're very far removed from that. We take our car everywhere. There's no sidewalks to go to the grocery store, or everything is just set up for convenience. Unfortunately, most of us, or most of the people listening, are going to have to strategically plan in activity in order to get to that exercise component that you mentioned in your quote. So, meaning strategically, maybe you are from now on going to take all your phone calls while you're walking instead of just sitting down in the office. Maybe from now on, you're going to intentionally park further away when you go to the grocery store so that you're accumulating a few more steps here and there. Maybe you're actually going to take the kids on the weekends and really going to go to the park and throwing a frisbee around and so on instead of just sitting on the couch, what probably most of them actually rather want to do at first anyway. Yeah, unfortunately, we have to be strategic. And as you mentioned, I am a digital nomad. I currently live in Bolivia, and in the city that I'm living in, it is very different to, for instance, in the US where you are, where most of my clients are as well. Life is still a little bit more set up in the way that you actually have to walk to a lot of places. And I, for instance, accumulate almost 10,000 steps almost naturally, just like walking to the cafe, walking to the grocery store and so on. But yes, I do realize, and from other places that I've lived in, I had to be a lot more strategic about actually that exercise component, unfortunately.
It's funny you say that because I have a friend from Bulgaria. And he told me 30 years ago, he said, "You're not a walking society in America." And what you just said, you walk to the cafe, right? And I've lived like yourself, I've lived different places in the world where it's, you don't get in the car and you go. It's like the cafe's 4 blocks down. If the weather's bad, you throw on your winter clothes. If the weather's good, you throw on your shorts and your sneakers and you hightail it down there and you eat and you walk back, right? And today,
Exactly.
you can have a restaurant around the corner and people drive to it. It's like, why don't okay, if you're going to eat anyway, but why don't you just do something before and something after that's very minimal, but going to help you digest better and feel better and etc. But how do you get that in people's heads? How do you get them to start thinking properly?
Yeah, that's really difficult, but I think also to the point of what we were saying earlier, we need to realize that if we just do the things that are convenient, that are easy, that are normal at first, we're going to end up with what is quote unquote considered normal. So that means being overweight, dying early of some sort of disease, losing muscle as we age, gaining body fat as we age, and so on. So if the person listening to this does not want to fall into this category of normal, which I assume because you're listening to John's podcast, then we need to start thinking in the way of, okay, I actually need to embrace the things that seem a little bit more difficult, that are not always the easiest thing, that are not always the most time efficient, perhaps either. So we actually need to start doing harder things. And the cool thing about this is actually also it's like a muscle that you build, and no pun intended here, but it becomes fun, and you actually start thriving on these little rewards of, hey, I overcame that lazy version of me. And once you walk there, you're like, oh, cool, I did that. Now I actually can enjoy my meal or my coffee or whatever even more. And you, like, by the end of the day, you find yourself actually fulfilled and satisfied, as opposed to just that having that antsiness within you because you didn't move your body. Our bodies were designed to move. So if we don't move them, no wonder we're having poorer sleep, we're experiencing all these mental health issues and all the rest of it. And then throw in that other component that you spoke about, the nutritional component as well. So if we're also not paying attention there, I'm really not surprised that we're seeing all these crises when it comes to depression, when it comes to dementia, cognitive decline in general, and every other aspect really of our health. So yeah, we also need to be intentional about the nutritional aspect, because if we're just doing what's easy and convenient in that regard and what's considered normal, we are going to go through the drive-through most of the time. We are going to order DoorDash or buy some ready-made heat up meals, and therefore destroying our health. So I would say we often need to peel back the onion completely and just think about what are some easy things we can do that are still healthy, because healthy, or making exercise and nutrition king and queen, doesn't always need to be it's that it takes a lot of time. We can get a great workout in within 20 minutes. We can cook a wonderful meal within 15 minutes or something like that. It doesn't necessarily mean it's more time consuming. It's just something that we need to often unlearn or relearn, because we've been fed all these lies about what we should be doing. If we watch TV and it's, oh, this is normal, and order your food here, and this is the latest chocolate cake that you can order. So we need to switch that off and really consciously choose what we let into our environment, and therefore also what we let into our heads.
Great points. I mean, you just think about it, right? I can pick up my phone while we're doing this podcast, and I can order any of about 50 different foods, right? I live in Dallas, Texas, right? Plenty of restaurants. I can go ding. And by the time we're done with this podcast, I can have a 7-course meal delivered to my front door by Uber Eats or some other service. Okay. And as convenient as that might be, and as attractive as that might sound from a convenience standpoint, it's deadly for your health. This modern convenience that we are so used to is not good for us. Whereas if I walked around the corner to the restaurant, at least I'd get some physicality. And then walking back, at least it would help me to digest whatever it is I consumed. We got to get people thinking that way, that, hey, easy is not necessarily good. It's easy.
And the hardest step, literally and figuratively, is always the first one, because we'll find ourselves like contemplating of or talking ourselves out of the good intention that we had, and then just be like looking out the window. There was like one raindrop. I better not walk there because I could get caught in like this thunderstorm just from seeing one raindrop. I'm gonna take the car after all. Or like you find these ways where you're basically having that argument with yourself. And I was sharing with you before we were recording that I've just started cold plunging. And even though this is like my third month or so doing it, literally every day that I plan to do the cold plunge, I find myself like 2, 3 hours or so beforehand debating with myself if I should go, or whether that there's like this really great reason that my mind somehow comes up with why I should cancel, because Oh, you felt a little tiny bit of a scratch in your throat this morning. Maybe you shouldn't do the cold plunge. And every time that I overcome that voice, which so far thankfully has been every single time, I am so proud of myself. And like honestly, I think again to my point of it's something we build. We practice that muscle of, hey, I can do hard things. I never thought that I could sit in 40 whatever degree water for 10 minutes, and yet here I am doing it. And not saying it gets easier over time, but saying that afterwards you always feel accomplished. And the same happens when we are eating a great meal, when we are doing the things that we're setting ourselves up to do. And it starts with things like I'm setting my alarm, I'm getting up at this time and not hitting snooze 10 times. I'm do more of the things that you set yourself out to do, even if they're teeny tiny, even if you're starting completely from scratch and you haven't done any exercise yet. Tomorrow maybe your goal is just to put on your gym shoes and walk around the house once, and then that's it. That should be your first goal for the first week. And then the next week you can build on that and take a lap around the block. And you build your confidence that way. Of course, if you start with, I haven't done anything, tomorrow I'm going to run 3 miles, you're setting yourself up for failure because you might be doing that, but you're probably going to tear something. You're only going to do that once every 2 weeks, if that. And therefore, you're not building on that. Really, you're going to come up with more excuses. So I would say start small, build your confidence, and then that applies to literally everything in life.
That's great advice. So let's talk about this, Lisa, with eating. Okay. Without getting into types of diets, some people are carnivores, some people are veg, some people are hybrids and everything else, and all sorts of different ways folks are eating. Would you suggest people are consistent in whatever they're doing, assuming that they're getting a decent result, as opposed to this week I'm a vegetarian, next week I'm eating steak, and the following week I'm eating only lobster at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and but all these other crazy things that we hear about that don't seem to get results? How important is the consistency, number one, in eating, and number two, in your exercise program, being consistent with it?
You have literally touched on my absolute favorite topic and my favorite word. Like consistency is hands down my favorite word. And I think if we look at people that are successful with anything, many of them, not all, but let's say many of them, they're not particularly talented or lucky and win a lot of money or whatever. They're just really consistent at what they're doing, whether it be in business, whether it be in terms of the sport that they're practicing, or whether it be with nutrition. And I think also from the sense of physiology, we need to acknowledge that our body, sometimes it takes a while for a certain message to come through. So if you're being vegan for 1 week, it takes more than a week to even just adjust your digestive system to a higher fiber intake and all of that. And so if you're only giving it 1 week, you might think, oh, veganism sucks because I was constipated the entire time. And so you're switching to being a carnivore, and then you're realizing, oh, I have no carbs here, I have no energy. And after 3 days, you're stopping that because you're feeling horrible. So our bodies physiologically need time to adjust. But more importantly, what we do on a consistent basis, that becomes part of our identity, becomes part of who we are. So if we're constantly switching between things, you don't really know who you are. You're not really saying, hey, I'm a person who eats vegetables on a regular basis, because 1 week you basically just ate fast food, another week you pretty much ate carnivore. So we need to think about what does that person that we want to be in the future, not just next week or next month, but in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, what does that person do on a regular basis? And the more we can actually like focus on doing the things that person is going to do consistently, the faster you're going to live into that version of you. So from a nutritional perspective, super important. Also for various other reasons, let's just say sodium, water intake, and so on, and even to support our energy levels. Our whole digestive tract, like our circadian rhythm, is also very closely tied to the times of day that we eat, the frequency that we eat, and the size of the meal. So if we're constantly varying, we're also not helping our sleep, and it's literally all connected. Same with the exercise. Again, as I mentioned before, we can definitely get away with a shorter workout, let's say 20, 30 minutes, 3 times per week. That would be a good minimum sort of baseline if we do that consistently. But yes, if we If we think next week I'm going to work out 6 times, again, it's going to increase your chances that the week after that you might only work out 4 times, and the week after that twice, and then you're not working out at all. So you're much better off setting yourself for something that you can sustain and do consistently. And again, that's going to transfer over to every single other area of your life. So I love the topic of consistency.
What about intermittent fasting? This is something that a lot of people are talking about. There's podcasts about it. There's people selling books about it and courses about it. It's something I've experimented with good results personally, so I'm a fan. But are you a fan? And if so, 16 and 8, or what's your best suggestion?
Yeah, great question. I'm a fan of intermittent fasting as a method for just reducing overall calories. So if someone is trying to lose weight, I think it can be a good strategy to simply eat less. Not always. Sometimes people have actually reported that if they fast in the morning, they're hungrier in the afternoon, so they make up for the same amount of calories and it's essentially inefficient. So there's no like magical aspect to intermittent fasting other than that it helps a lot of people eat a little bit less. But outside of that, we need to be cautious with a few things. I still think it can be very good also for your digestive system. You're giving your digestion a longer break. A lot of people don't even report being hungry in the morning, so why forcing yourself to eat something in the morning? But the few things that I do want people to think about is number one, if you currently have hormonal imbalances, for example, women going through perimenopause or just in general, women are a little bit more insulin sensitive. So we tend to not respond as well to longer periods without food on average. Again, this is just really broadly speaking. But a lot of the research that was done, especially early on intermittent fasting, was mostly done on men and young men between the ages of 20 and 30. So they're normally not struggling with hormonal imbalances. And a lot of the women that I have worked with said they were experiencing things like brain fog, really very almost feeling like jittery. They had it increased their overall cortisol levels, and they already had a very stressful life. So it was actually just exacerbating hormonal issues that we saw previously. So to answer your question, I think intermittent fasting can be a great strategy for keeping calories in check, for helping digestive system. But if there are contraindications such as hormonal imbalances, I would advise against it, or at least having a protein shake or something easy on your stomach in the morning and then resuming your meals later on. And speaking about protein shake, also, that's another sort of red flag that I sometimes see because many people that I work with, especially again women, they often struggle getting in enough protein over the course of the day. And so if we're skipping breakfast also or not having anything in the morning, then it makes it even harder to get to the ideal protein number. And the reason why protein is so important, especially as we age, is because it does help us retain or even build lean body mass. And so the muscle mass that we're trying to hold on to as we're aging in order to stay active for as long as possible, in order just to have a lean body and look more defined and so on. And so, yeah, if we're skipping that breakfast, it can often be tricky to get to that goal. And on top of that, if we're working out in the morning and not eating anything for 3, 4 hours or so afterwards, we're sometimes diminishing the results of the workout that we are getting. It's not that there's this whole anabolic window or so that people were talking about for a long time, or that window of gains or so. That's not even what I'm talking about. It's more that our exercise increases our stress level in the first instance, and that's a good thing. That's what we want, because that means our body is going to adapt to the stress stimulus that we gave it. But if we're not eating anything for a long time afterwards, we're not helping our body down regulate right away. And we want to down regulate as soon as possible after we finish the workout, because that's going to initiate the recovery, the adaptation process. And so if we're eating something sooner rather than later, within an hour or two after a workout, that immediately, any kind of food that's coming in, but carbs in particular, blunt cortisol. So that means we're going to get into more of a relaxed rest and digest sort of state, and that's helping with recovery. So if you're working out really early in the morning, I would say you can still intermittent fast, but shift your food to earlier in the day and maybe stop eating at 4 or 5 p.m. instead of starting with your food later and finishing your food later. Yes, intermittent fasting, I'm a fan in the right setting.
talking about something that a couple things that people probably have never asked you about on a show. So I'm going to do that. Okay.
Perfect.
Circadian rhythms earlier. And I've been a student a little bit of Ayurvedic medicine over the years. And one of the things that our friends in India will tell you is go to bed at the same time, get up at the same time. But the time we're supposed to get up, now most Americans aren't going to want to hear this. You're supposed to get up about, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but about 45 minutes before first light, which means
Mhm.
like this time of year in Dallas, the sun comes up about 6 a.m. So that means about 4:45. Now, I find as an entrepreneur, and you probably do too, your brain starts going at about 4 a.m. It's
Oh
what
yeah.
do I got to do today and who do I got to call, all that stuff that we go through. But even if you're not an entrepreneur, okay, maybe you work for somebody else, for example, okay, what is the value of getting up early and getting at your day, be it your exercise, be it your self development, be it your maybe you're reading your Bible, maybe you're reading a self development, well, whatever it happens to be. Your thing's your thing. Tell people why it's valuable to not only maintain the circadian rhythm, but why it's so important for the longevity and health.
Oh wow, yeah. Before becoming a nutrition coach, I was actually a police officer, first response police officer for a few years. So I had the pleasure of working shift work, including night shifts. And we had a horrible, absolutely horrible shift roster where it was 2 days of day shifts, 2 days of late shift until 3 a.m. and two night shifts, and then 3 days off, and then you'd start again. And this whole thing over and over again. And it's something that you can do and sustain for a couple of months, but after a few years, literally, I felt every single aspect of my health deteriorate, including or primarily also my mental health. Like, honestly, I'm a very happy, positive kind of person, but at that stage, I woke up sometimes thinking like, oh, if I die today, is there's no loss. This is not really worth living anyway. And that was for me like a wake up call was like, what is going on? I need to look into this because I always thought I'm making do. I can get by with 5, 6 hours sleep on average. And a lot of people that you talk to, even if they don't work shift work, they say, oh, I feel fine. The thing is, even if you feel fine, maybe you're just so accustomed to sleeping that little and not making sleep a priority, meaning you're probably not setting a bedtime or you're just sleeping all over the place. And really, that really got me into a bit of a rabbit hole of digging up everything I could find about the importance of sleep. I included a book or I read a book which was called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, a brilliant book, literally about everything in regards to sleep. So if you're listening to this and you like reading, check it out. I can only recommend it. But in this book, he's really saying how it affects pretty much every aspect of our life and how during sleep, we're doing pretty much reprogramming of our mind where we're ingraining things that we learned over the day. We're discarding of information, including emotional load that we don't need anymore from the previous day. Of course, we're going into our physical recovery. The best physical enhancement or recovery method you can possibly do is sleeping more. And so if you're doing less and less of that over time, you're becoming sick more often. You're getting prone to more chronic diseases and so on. Setting a specific bedtime should really always be the first place. Most people start with, when do I want to get up? That's good too, but it should be, okay, how do I allow myself 8 or so hours of sleep opportunity in order to get 7 quality hours of sleep minimum? How do I set up my bedroom properly with the right temperature, dark enough, quiet enough, no pets in the room, and so on? And then how do I work my day around that? To your point, I think the morning hours are honestly magical. I think I was recording a podcast with someone yesterday and we were recording at noon and he was like, ah, I pretty much already had a full day. I ticked off or mentioned like 10 different things on his to-do list and he was like, I think I got more done than most people in a week. I'm like, yeah, you did. That's amazing. And that's that great feeling that you get when you get it feels like you get a head start on the day as opposed to when you wake up kind of groggy at 7 or 8, you grab your cup of coffee, you drag yourself around by the time you start work. It's 9 o'clock, your body hasn't moved at all. And then you start panicking about the day because you haven't done anything. You haven't gotten in any steps. You haven't been outside. You haven't checked your social media or your messages. You haven't done anything creative or productive. And so, particularly if you have a family, I think it can be super, super valuable getting that start or doing something for yourself, putting something positive in your mind, doing something positive with your body before everyone else starts waking up, before you take care of everyone else. Because life gets busy, life comes around, and then you get the email of you need to take care of this, your kids want to be picked up from there, your wife or partner or whatever wants this and that, and it's just like catching up. And then it comes to the place where you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'll work out tomorrow, and then tomorrow, and it never happens. So if we do the harder things or these things first, at least then by 9 o'clock, you're like, I've already done my spiritual work. I've already moved my body, done the most important things, and now I can focus on business, family, etc.
That's what I find. Yeah, I'm up early. If I, like I said when you interviewed me, I think I told you this, but if I get back from the gym and the sun's up, I'm late. It's I want to be there with that early morning crowd, and it's amazing. The gym's full, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. There are a lot of people at the gym now. Now you wouldn't know that if you never went at that time.
Yes.
Okay, and they're not coming in from being at the bar all night. There are people who got up early. A lot of triathletes I run into at that time, and marathoners, and people who really have to plan their training around their work schedule, family schedule, etc. And it's hey, that's the only it's either then or it doesn't get done for those people. That's not me, okay, at this stage of my life. I want to get done because it's okay, I got a full business day coming up by 9 o'clock. I want to be at work. And then I want to work and I do another little workout in the afternoon. I do a walk or I go to Hot Works now to do some crazy stuff that I'm doing. But I want to talk more about you. And here's another basic question. Okay. Breathing. There's a whole book now on breathing and talk about how important it is and how most of us, myself included, sometimes have to remind ourselves we're all breathing. You don't have to think to breathe, but there's ways to breathe that are more effective and beneficial. What are they?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'll include myself in that category with you as well, unfortunately, especially when I'm like on a screen or even on the phone or so in a sort of compromised position, hunched over in a not optimal for my lungs either. And I notice how shallow I'm breathing only into my chest. I'm like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling more anxious? Oh, okay. I guess I need to straighten up a little bit. I guess I should breathe into my belly and should breathe a little bit more deeply. And oh, lo and behold, a couple of seconds or breaths later, I'm like a lot more relaxed. I can actually speak a lot better and feel the anxiety literally going away. So I do think nowadays when we're so busy and stressed, or most people just in general, when we're busy and stressed, we tend to breathe shorter or more shallow. And we, like you said, we need to remind ourselves that a good quality deep breath where we're getting the maximum amount of oxygen into our body actually goes all the way into our belly button. And not just that, but our whole diaphragm expands like 360. Essentially, your ribs should go out to the side, even to your back and down below as well. And that's so important for many other things. I actually had someone who is a pelvic floor physiotherapist on my podcast last week, and she was talking about how the breath is so important for pelvic floor health. And for anybody, men have pelvic floor health issues as well. It's not just women. Often we think it's just women postpartum or at certain stages of life in general, but no, I think the pelvic floor is so important for anybody to address. And one of the first things we can do to improve our pelvic floor health is breathing more deeply. But for me personally, it's something that I mostly become aware of when I notice my change in an emotion or a mental state. When I do anxious, or why am I feeling a little bit more irritated or something like that. And in those instances, I need to pull myself back and think, okay, what can I do right now to shift that? And the breath is such a cool way to shift our energy really quickly, whether we want to upregulate and be like more alert before a podcast or before a stage performance or something like that, and looking into that breathing of switching ourselves on a bit more, or whether you're at night laying in your bed wondering why your mind is racing and blah, 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 and you actually want to calm down. And so one of the things I'm a really big fan of, and it's called the physiological sigh. Andrew Huberman is a big proponent of that, or is the person who has talked about this more. And it essentially the practice is that you breathe in once really deeply through your nose, as deep as you can. And once you're at the top of that, You breathe in one more time, just a quick breath, the filling in that little bit of extra space that you got in your lungs, and then you exhale very deeply through your mouth. And so this is called the physiological sigh. And doing 3 to 5 cycles of that, I guarantee you, you will feel calmer because it's supposed to be the quickest way to activate your vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is directly linked with the parasympathetic, so with the rest and digest nervous system. Another one that I used to be a big fan of is called box breathing. I hear it's often used in the military practice where we're breathing in for 4 seconds, holding it for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, and then holding it for 4 seconds. And either of those will help you down regulate really quickly. And even like throughout the day, if something upsetting happened, let's say your boss gave you some upsetting news, or when you finish a workout and you can notice you're just like basically wound up and you have another meeting to go to and so on, I encourage you to just take 3 minutes to try and calm down, because again, the sooner we can down regulate after our workout, we're actually initiating that recovery process and progress quicker if we're just able to tap into that briefly.
It's funny you said that, and everybody probably saw me straighten up, but it's like I don't where I fold my shoulders, and especially I'm on the 3, 4 podcasts a day sometimes, and
Of
it's just
course.
like just going like that. It's just like that extra little bit of oxygen that comes into your chest, goes right to your brain, makes you feel better and more alert, right? So
100%.
yeah, more than that. So let me ask you a couple of more questions here. There's so many things that are going on in health that are new. They're not new for you or I because we deal with this stuff a lot, but maybe our listeners today, some of them it's new for. What do you think of red light therapy? Have you used it at all? Are your clients using it?
I've used it a little bit. I have a smaller handheld device, just mostly for like skin things, to be completely transparent. I know that some of my clients, they even have a red light sauna, and I'm well aware of some of the research on red light therapy. And I think it sounds like it can be very efficient or effective for various things, whether that be even eyesight, whether just in general skin health, and therefore also skin cancer prevention, which is one of the most common forms of cancer, and so on. So I'm a big fan of it without admittedly knowing too much about it. I will be transparent.
What about peptides? Peptides are being talked about every time you go on Facebook. Of course, if you put anything in, they do listen to your conversation, and you get 16 ads for peptides. What's your thoughts on not only peptides but the science thereof?
So I just recently attended a couple of conferences just in general on health, longevity, muscle development, etc. And there on each one of these conferences, there were about two experts that spoke about peptides. And from what I heard there, I do think it can be a good strategy for several things. For example, injury treatment. If someone is complaining of long-term low back pain or things like that, it can be a good strategy to work with that. It can also just be a good strategy for, let's just say, other anti-aging sort of things that we're looking into. But again, to be honest, number one, I would never prescribe it to anybody because I don't know enough about it. I would say if you're interested in it, speak with an expert. What I do think though is that oftentimes these shiny little things seem like the cure to everything, or seem like that's going to be my salvation. And we're failing to address those fundamental things that you and I are so emet about, such as sleep, such as consistency with exercise, such as hydration, such as am I eating enough vegetables and getting the right amount of macronutrients or right distribution of macronutrients. And then even then we can layer in things like, am I getting in my daylight exposure? Am I reading the right things and is my mental health in the right place? Am I doing the right kind of exercise? Because maybe you're over exercising, and that could be a reason why your body is feeling so low in energy all the time, or you're not eating enough. Perhaps sometimes that's a reason as well. So if we're failing to address all of these fundamentals and maybe even the supplement layer or things like cold plunge and heat exposure, why do we have to look at these shiny little objects that perhaps can make you feel better like for a little while, but you're leaving the big rocks for the tiny little pebbles and probably spending a fortune in the meantime for something where, truthfully, we don't know the really long-term outcomes. So I would say let's focus on the big movers, and that's what I do with most of my clients, really. I would say I'm more of a consistency coach than just a nutrition or fitness coach because that is my goal to get people thinking long term, to get people thinking in what is sustainable and what can I still do when I'm 60, 70, 80 years old.
Exactly, exactly. So let's talk about a couple other things. Let's have some fun for a minute. 53 countries you've been in, I think.
Yes, that's correct. Yes. I have been traveling for some time, and I would say I'm probably born. I have been born with a bit of a travel bug. My dad has always had a drive for adventures as well. So when I was little, I think I was between 3 and 6 years old. We were actually living in West Africa because my dad was a development worker. The country there is called Burkina Faso. It's just a small country close to the Ivory Coast and Mali, but yes, a very unknown country and nowadays absolutely unsafe or even more unsafe than it was back then. But that was like my upbringing. And then even when we got back to Germany, which is where I'm from, we often, one of the beauties of living in Europe is everything is so quote unquote close. So it would often be like, oh, let's go for the weekend, let's go to Austria for a hike. Next week we have school holidays, let's go to Italy for the week. And then 2 weeks later, let's go to the Czech Republic for lunch because it was 2 hours of a drive away or so. So that's the mentality that I grew up with. And interestingly, somehow as I entered my teenage years, I became super interested in the US actually. So from when I was like 12 years onwards, I started talking to my mom about, Mom, I want to do a high school year in the US. I don't care where they're sending me, please, and enable me to do that. So when I was 16, I went to Nebraska and did a high school year there, stayed with a local family. At first, the first time when I heard I was going to be placed in Nebraska, I actually started crying, to be completely transparent, just because I didn't know where that was. I was like, where the heck is Nebraska? I've never even heard of this state. And then I Googled it and it came up with the Cornhusker state. And I was like, what the heck's a Cornhusker? Meanwhile, my best friend was being sent to California. And of course, everyone, like from movies, you're like, oh, California is the place to go. But I honestly, I had the best time. She didn't have a great time. I had the best time because I went to a teeny tiny little high school. I got to play all the different sports. Everybody in the whole entire town of 1,000 people knew my name because I was something special. There has had not been a German exchange student before. So I had the best first exposure to the US and I'm still friends with several of the people that I met then in 2006. And that was just the continuance of like my travel bug. So I went back home to Germany, finished my high school career there, and already knew I wanted to travel the world once I finished high school. I already enrolled in university for the next year, but I was like, Mom, I'm taking a year off. I'm just traveling around. So I did a trip around the world and met what is now my ex-husband in New Zealand and got stuck there after a few years and was like, oh, I'm gonna move here after all and do my university degree over there. And so I moved to New Zealand for 10 years and then we separated in 2019. And since then, I've basically been roaming around and lived in Thailand, Indonesia, Dubai, and the last few years, more than anything, Latin America. So yeah, I was in Colombia and Mexico before I came here to Bolivia.
Wow. So you speak German, English, Spanish, I assume?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And
Yeah, tiny little bit of French, but those are the three that I'm more or less fluent in.
I hear great things about Bolivia, by the way. I have not been there, but it's on my list. It's
Yeah, everybody here even says, what brought you here, Lisa? It's such a random place for a quote unquote tourist to be because it's landlocked, so it doesn't have any ocean. But what first brought me here is something called the Uyuni Salt Flats. It's a very special geographical location. So it looks like a salt desert, but very often it rains there and it creates this beautiful mirror image on top of the desert. So if you'll Google it, you'll see the most incredible pictures. And it's been on my to see list or to go to list for many years. And so when I was living in Colombia, I was like, I'm just gonna take like a 1 week trip to Bolivia to see these Uyuni salt flats. And when I got here, I also toured other cities like La Paz and Titicaca Lake and so on, and everything I liked. And my guide said to me, Lisa, I think you would also like a city called Santa Cruz, which is where I'm at now, because they call it the Miami of Bolivia. It's like, oh yeah, maybe next time. And so I went back to Colombia and I had some visa issues there. And they said to me, oh, you have to leave the country within the next 10 days. And I had no idea where to go. And so I was like, I guess I'm going to that place that my guide recommended and moved here. And I have actually loved it ever since. So yeah, sometimes you just need to trust whatever plan the universe has for you.
Yeah, I mean, I my younger years, I wound up in a lot of places that I was like, how in the world did I get? But then once you're there, it happens there too, like it would happen in Germany or Dallas or anywhere else.
That's it, and it absolutely always depends on your attitude as well, right? I won't lie that at first when they said to me, you need to leave the country within 10 days, I was upset and I was like, oh, but I want to stay here. But then as soon as you're like, okay, I can't change it. I just need to make the best out of this. And yeah, that's it. Because I think that's one of the things I have fallen in love with over the last few years is Stoicism. 6, 7, 8 years ago, it was the first time I heard about Stoicism and I started reading the first sort of Stoic books. And one of the main philosophies there is control what you can control and let go of the rest. And I think if we just apply that to most things in life, whether that's traffic or our partner pissing us off or like whatever it is, like you can't control other people, but you can control how you respond to things. And so just focusing on that has helped me a lot in my life.
Honestly, that's good advice too. Your podcast. Tell people about your podcast and where can they find you? Where can they locate you? And I know you do training all over the world. Obviously, you don't just do it in Bolivia, right? You're an online coach.
Absolutely.
So a
Yes.
lot of our people are always looking for another step, whether it's a short-term thing or long-term thing. Tell them how they can reach you.
Amazing. Yeah, so my podcast is called the Nutrition and Life Podcast, and I have amazing guests like John on there. That's actually how we connected. So thank you so much. I'm really excited that we were able to cross-share information as well. And my nutrition coaching and fitness business is called Nutrition Coaching and Life, and that's the same handle on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, the website as well. So Nutrition Coaching and Life is how you can find me anywhere. And if you're listening to this conversation, I always am super excited about messages, just someone saying, hey, I heard you and John speak. I liked your conversation or whatever other comment you have, even if it's negative. I'm excited to hear from you.
I don't think anybody could be negative about you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you very
hey, guys. But so, last word of advice, okay? So let's take the person out there who's listening to us, and I'm in a good place right now. Okay, my training's been super consistent the last few years. My diet's been super consistent. My health, thank God, has been really good especially for a guy my age. I'm starting some new things that I shared with you earlier. I'm starting to do hot yoga, hot Pilates today at 4:30. I'm in hot Pilates. But so I'm in a good place, but not everybody is. And I always
much.
was. And you always weren't for that matter. I know your story a little bit, right? We've all struggled. Okay. So the person out there right now who says, I'm having a hard time getting off the couch. I'm having a hard time getting to the gym or the track or the whatever it is that they like to do. How can they start incrementally to, I don't know, what is it, motivation? Is it a kick in their own butt that they kick their own butt? Does their spouse need to kick them in the butt? Do they need to read something? Give them a place to start.
I would say in general, I would advise people to do fewer things, but do them better. And that applies to nutrition as well. So, for instance, I'm often asked for what's the perfect workout plan for me? Or can you give me some recipes for XYZ? And I'm like, okay, let's strip this back. Where are you currently at with what you're doing? So if you're listening to this and you're literally not doing anything, again, going back to what is something you know you can consistently do on a daily basis. Going for a 10-minute walk, I think for many people that's something you can achieve and building the confidence there. And same with regards to food. What is something you can consistently do or start doing tomorrow? Maybe you can start adding just a portion of green vegetables to your lunch. Do that for 1 week, do it consistently, and then build on that. Maybe the week after that, you can add a handful of fruit to your breakfast and thinking more about what healthy thing can I add to my life that's super simple, as opposed to always thinking like, what am I forbidden to do? What am I forbidden to eat? And having all these rules and overwhelming yourself with what you think is perfect as opposed to what is sustainable for you. I think we tend to, as just humans, we overcomplicate things and want the perfect overall plan right away, but doing fewer things and doing them well. And you can apply that again to your business, you can apply that to relationships, you can apply that to any habit you want to create. I will give a last book recommendation. As you can tell, I also like to read. And this book is called Essentialism by Greg McKeown, or however you pronounce that surname, but McKeown, yeah. And it's a really good book, just stating how we tend to focus on too many things. We all load our plate up way too much with social engagements, thinking we need to be doing it all. And then by the end of the day, we're just completely worn out, not having that energy for the things that really truly matter. So if we focus more on fewer things, having our priorities in life clear, like family, like what things are really important at work and what things are the big movers in terms of training and nutrition, it's going to make it so much easier to say no to any kind of invite or social thing or whatever that's actually just the distraction that you're only doing out of people pleaseritis or whatever you want to call it, that's not actually serving you or anyone else. So that would be my last sort of advice.
Great, great. Lisa, this has been a privilege, my friend, and let's do it again.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check back weekly for more exciting episodes. And don't miss Ink and Insight every Wednesday, where we celebrate iconic authors and dive into their impactful works.